Everybody, welcome back. This is another podcast short with Hendry and Parker, PA. I am Chris, and this is Don.
Hey, everybody.
And we are just doing different topics, discussing different topics of the law to help people get an understanding. The first one we did was on trial. This one, we're going to talk a little bit about domestic violence injunctions.
And domestic violence injunctions can come in several forms. Domestic violence itself, repeat violence, sexual or dating violence, or stalking.
So you've probably heard these called restraining orders, right? These are actually in civil court. They're not criminal. They're in civil court, but if you violate them civilly and criminally. So they're sort of complicated in that manner, but it's basically just a piece of paper that says that someone can't come near you. I mean,
and the burden of proof in these cases is much, much lower than it is in a criminal case. Somebody can put out allegations about being abused, being stalked, being beaten up. And those allegations on their face can lead to a temporary injunction, which can last a month, 6 weeks.
So how do you get a temporary injunction? Say I'm somebody out there who's getting harassed, bothered by someone, a former partner that I used to date, who is now sending me texts all day long. I can't get them to stop. What do I do?
Well, I think in that case, when it's coming by text or by telephone, what you would need to do is to let that individual know, preferably either through an email or a text, stop, that you consider it harassment and you don't want to speak with them anymore. If they continue to violate that and continue to try to contact you, at that point you are within your rights to seek an injunction against that individual.
Now, why would it be important for someone to hire an attorney to help them along with this process in getting a DVI injunction?
And that's a great question, Chris, because a lot of times people don't hire attorneys for these. They just go into court, and these things can devolve into Jerry Springer court. I mean, it can be absolutely crazy.
The Wild West of court proceedings.
The Wild West of court proceedings. And while the allegations are sometimes comical, sometimes they are very serious, and sometimes there are people out there that do need to be restrained from coming into contact with people because they are dangerous. And it just runs the whole gamut. But these proceedings are very serious for a person who gets an injunction placed against them.
So if you get a temporary injunction, the judge is going to look over your application, and they're going to issue an emergency injunction, a temporary injunction.
If the allegations fit within the statutory definitions, yes, they won't even look any further. They'll issue that temporary injunction and set it for a hearing. And at that point, both parties can come in with attorneys, or they can represent themselves, bring forth witnesses and evidence of the violence or the stalking or whatever the complaint is, and go forward through a evidentiary hearing.
Now, in that initial pleading, that initial application that you fill out when you go down to the courthouse and you fill out that application, the judge who looks over that's going to assume that everything you're saying is correct.
For the most part.
And as long as it's feasible, it makes sense that it's not far out there that couldn't happen.
No, absolutely. And oftentimes the judge will sign that. And some of the consequences of that are, if you own a firearm, you have to give up all of your firearms during the temporary injunction, and if that permanent injunction is granted, you cannot regain your firearms until the injunction is expired. And that could be anywhere from 6 months to a year to indefinite.
So in short, if someone goes in and fills out this application, the judge believes that everything they're saying is correct, whether it is or it's not, you can lose your Second Amendment right and your right to freedom to basically even come near that person.
Right, because if you come within 500 feet of this person, which is the typical distance that the court prohibits you from coming into contact or contacting a person electronically or by phone, then you are going to be guilty of a misdemeanor, and you can spend some time in the county jail.
Okay, so say now it's approved temporarily. The judge sets it for a hearing. It goes 2 to 3 weeks out. You have a hearing. Is this like a trial?
It is like a mini trial, essentially. You put forth witnesses, bring forth evidence, and the judge is going to make a determination. Witnesses can be cross-examined, and the rules of evidence in a domestic violence hearing are typically a lot looser than they are in a criminal hearing.
Now, if you're someone who's received one of these, you've gotten served by a police officer saying that someone has taken out an injunction against you, and you want to fight that injunction, you can also hire an attorney because you are a party now to a civil case, and you have the potential of losing your rights to come in. So we also handle cases like that where people come in and say, somebody, an ex or somebody who's mad at me, they're trying to get leverage in a family law custody battle. They filed an application for an injunction, whether it be stalking, repeat domestic violence, or whatever it is, and we will actually represent you in those too. And why is it important for somebody like that to have one?
Well, it's very important because oftentimes people will make up allegations and seek an injunction against someone purely to take away time sharing from the other party so they can have essentially full custody of the kids. And this is obviously an abuse of the legal system, but it happens more often than you'd probably believe.
And something to remember as well is there's no discovery process. This is not like a regular trial for somebody who practices trials, because you can bring in on that day whatever evidence you have and just lay it on the table. So they're very interesting to watch. If you ever get a chance to go down to the courthouse and watch some of these, they're very interesting to watch these, especially when they don't have attorneys, because it becomes a real crap show, if you know what I mean.
It does. It can be pretty humorous sometimes.
And people are put at a huge disadvantage, especially if one party has a lawyer and the other party doesn't, because if you don't know procedure in objecting and certain information that can come in, you might not be able to get anything out, and you might not even be able to get your side out because the other party has an attorney who's up there objecting to your questions and knows the procedure of how things are supposed to come in. So it really does help to have an attorney in this process. It is a big strike against you if you have a domestic violence injunction or any type of injunction against you when you go out and get a job. That's something that somebody might see on your record.
Yeah, I mean, certainly an employer sees that you've been issued a domestic violence injunction, or God forbid, multiple ones over the years. They're probably not going to take a risk on you and hire you because they think that you might be a dangerous individual who stalks people, who beats people, and the proof is sometimes not that great. So probably the worst thing to do in a case like this is, if you are served a temporary injunction, is to ignore it. Because if you ignore it and it goes to court, the court is going to rule against you by default, meaning that you didn't show up, you lose, and that injunction is going to be put in place against you, even if the evidence is not there that would normally be required to convict somebody.
And the contact, or the lack of contact that you're allowed to have after this is issued, is really no joke, right? I mean, you talked earlier about it. You can't Facebook. You can't so much as call them. You can't do any type of contact with them as much as a smoke signal. And the police and the sheriff's office take that very seriously. Am I right?
They do, and oftentimes you'll have people who have an injunction granted against somebody contacting that person to try to goad them into responding so they can be arrested.
And that's not illegal.
It's not illegal, but it's absurd.
But you need to know, you need to be educated on these. If you've received a domestic violence injunction served against you, a temporary one, call us. Call an attorney right away, because it's very important that we at least assess. We do a free consultation to assess what it's going to take, and if we have to, we'll come into court with you and help you out. But that's all the time we have for domestic violence injunctions, a very serious proceeding that you should hire an attorney for. Any parting words?
If you get an injunction served against you, call us.
Thanks a lot. This has been another Legal Short with Hendry and Parker, PA. Thank you.
Thanks.